Hi guys and welcome back. In this video we're going to learn about lists, tuples and sets. Three different collections in Python that allow us to store multiple values in a single variable so that we can use them all at once or maybe extract some of them individually. Let's get started. We're going to define one of each just so you know how they are defined. So L is going to be a list of three elements. And here I've created a variable called L for list, and I've made it equal to a list. The list is defined by using square brackets, and inside the square brackets you can put different values as long as they are separated by a comma. So what I've got here is one string, then I've got a comma, then I've got another string, then I've got another comma, and then I've got another string. So three strings separated by commas inside square brackets. This defines a list. If you didn't have lists or tuples or sets, you would have to define three variables, one for each friend. And that would make it difficult to interact with all the values at once. You'll understand what I mean as we progress through the video. A tuple is very similar to a list, but instead of using square brackets, you use normal brackets. The key difference between lists and tuples is that you can't modify a tuple. Whereas you can add and remove elements from a list, you can't add and remove elements from a tuple. That's the key difference between the two. Finally, a set is again very similar, but you use curly braces instead of square or normal brackets. And the key difference between a set and the other two is that while you can add and remove elements from a set, you can't have duplicate elements, so you couldn't have Bob twice in the set. Also, lists and tuples keep the order of the elements. So whenever you print out this list, it's always going to have Bob, then Rolf, and then Anne in that order. But sets don't necessarily keep the order, or rather the order is not guaranteed. So the order could change at any moment. Sets are useful in a few scenarios that we will learn about in the coming videos. You can access individual elements of a list or a tuple by using subscript notation. So for example, you can print L and then 0 in square brackets. So what we've got here is our list variable, and then we've got square brackets, 0, and close square brackets. This notation here is called subscript notation, and you can apply it to many things in Python, but you can use it on lists and tuples, and what it does is it gives you that element, an element with index 0. Elements in programming usually start counting at 0, so the first element here, Bob, has an index of 0. Then this one has an index of 1, and this one has an index of 2. So you could access Anne by doing L2. This also works for tuples, so you can use your tuple variable there instead, and that's totally fine as well. However, it doesn't make sense to do that in sets because they don't have any order. So if you access the third element of a set, you don't know what you're going to get. That's why sets don't allow you to use subscript notation on them. You can modify individual items in a list by accessing the item itself using subscript notation, and then treating it like a variable. So for example, you can say L0 equals Smith, and then if you print your list and you run it, you'll see that the first element is now Smith, second one's Rolf, and the third one's Anne. However, if you try to modify a tuples element and you run this file, you will actually get an error because tuples cannot be modified after they're created, so you can't use the equal sign on anything inside a tuple. Of course, you cannot do this on a set because a set does not allow for this subscript notation. You can add elements to a list by doing l.append. And what append does is it will add an element to the end of the list. So if we append, for example, Smith to this list, and then we print it out, you'll see that this list will now have 4 elements. That's Bob, Rolf, Anne, and Smith. But again, because tuples do not allow modification, you can't change them, then if you do something like this, you're also going to get an error, and it's going to tell you that the tuple object has no attribute append. What that means is that we've tried to access something called append inside, that's what the full stop means. So we're trying to access append inside of our tuple, but our tuple doesn't have anything called append inside it. We're going to learn more about what I mean by inside. in the next few videos. It is a little bit of a more complicated topic, but rest assured that you can't add things or remove things from a tuple. Talking about removal, you can remove things from a list by doing l.remove and then passing in the element that you want to remove. For example, if you wanted to remove Bob, then this would do that. And then if you print L, then you'll see that Bob has been removed and you are only left with Rolf and Anne. Going back to adding, you can add things to a set. So you can do set add Smith, and then you can print your set. And here you can see that you get Anne, Bob, Smith, and Rolf. Notice that the order is not the same as when we created this, but all the elements are there. However, if you do the same thing twice, you'll see that Smith will only be here once. That's because even though we told the set to add Smith twice, there can be no duplicate elements inside a set, so the second Smith is actually ignored. This was a very brief primer or refresher regarding what lists, tuples, and sets are. So just remember that lists are the most standard collection where you can add and remove elements as well as modify them. In a tuple, you have those elements and you can't modify them and you can't add or remove elements. And finally, a set has no duplicate elements and it also has no order. That's everything for this video. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.